Welcome to this webinar, The Future of GRC Stream in Action. I'm your host, Sulsan Hamawandi, and I'm the Marketing Executive here at Acuity Risk Management. And I'm delighted to be joined by our CEO, Simon Marvel.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Simon. Just before we get into the webinar today, I just wanted to outline some things that might help you enjoy your experience today. The first one is please do submit your questions as we go. We'll try and get to as many of them as we can at the end, but that question box is there for you to use. And any questions we don't get onto, we can reach out to you directly. If for any reason, after this webinar, you come up with a really good question, you're more than welcome to follow up with us after the webinar as well. You can see our email addresses on the screen, and we're also happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well. So please do find us and connect with us there too. For those of you that joined early, you may have seen that in the resources, in the handout section, there are two resources for you to download. One of them is the Acuity brochure, which gives you a high-level introduction to our business. But there's also a really exclusive document in there as well. This is a solutions perspective, an independent review written by Michael Rasmussen, who actually took part in this webinar series in the 3 sessions prior to this. So if you download that, you'll get to see his evaluation of Stream based on his expertise and also conversations he's had with our customers. So I would highly recommend that you download that as well. That's a really exciting piece that we published today, so hot off the press. And then finally, there'll be a short survey at the end as well. We'd really appreciate your feedback. And there's also a question in there if you would like to schedule a call with us following this session. Again, we'd be more than happy to have specific conversation around your requirements. This survey should only take you 1 or 2 minutes, so we'd be really grateful if you could do that at the end. So this webinar is the final webinar in a 4-part series. The first 3 sessions were recorded and hosted with the internationally recognised pundit on GRC, Michael Rasmussen, who I previously mentioned wrote the solutions perspective on Stream, which you'll be seeing today. These recordings are available on the Acuity website now, but they're also available on our customer portal. So for any of our customers that haven't seen the new portal, please do check that out. These recordings are there, and this one will be there too. We'll also send out this recording in the coming days, so you can share that and watch that again if you wish to. So just moving on to the agenda, I will do a quick recap of the series so far and the key themes that were identified by both Michael and Simon. But I'll keep this short because I know everyone's here for the demonstration of Stream, which Simon will be delivering, where he'll bring to life the key themes that we've identified. We'll then summarise with some key takeaways, tell you where you can find more resources if there's anything in particular you want to know more about. And then finally, we'll come on to your all-important questions. So please don't be shy. Please do ask them as you go along, and we'll get to those at the end as well. So the business environment is dynamic. And even prior to COVID, there were things that were changing within businesses, both internally and externally as well. So this could involve, their business strategies, their business processes, the people that they have on board, and also the technologies that they have implemented, so their tech stack. But there are also external factors that will impact businesses. So these could be economic changes, regulatory pressures, political issues and challenges, and also technological advancements as well. So businesses have always needed to navigate chaos and keep up with change. And it was COVID that really proved that we needed that 360-degree contextual awareness, because these risks are really interconnected, and what may affect one risk may have a knock-on effect somewhere else. So these can't be managed in silos. We need the complete full visibility of our environment to manage this complexity. And this is really where GRC comes in. And before I go into what needs to be managed or what needs to be achieved through GRC technologies, I really want to focus on the the definition of what GRC means. So according to Michael Rasmussen, and it was highlighted in the series, he mentioned that it was the ability to reliably achieve objectives, so that's the governance piece, that's the governance function there, while managing uncertainty, and that's the risk management element, while acting with integrity, and that's really the compliance and ethics element. So it's these three things that businesses really need to consider in order to go about their day-to-day runnings smoothly. So with that in mind then, how can GRC technology help you achieve resilience and build agility? So if I go on to the next slide here, you can see here the first point that we've got on this slide is the ability to drive business performance and make strategic decisions. According to ISO 31000, the international standard of risk management, risk is the effect of uncertainty and objectives. And this means that businesses will prosper if they achieve their objectives. So we need to take a top-down, objective-led approach to managing risk. And management really do need to be involved and lead from the top. So this filters down throughout the organization. Next point that we've got is the increasing complexity and dependencies across the entire business ecosystem. I mentioned earlier that there are many interdependencies between risk. So you need that enterprise-wide visibility and collaboration between different functions and teams. HR need to be talking to sales, sales need to be talking to legal. We need to understand what those risks are. And one thing that stood out to me when Michael was talking is that he often sees that these different functions do these separately without taking into account all the other risks that are there. So it's really important to have that collaboration, but it's also important to see what risks are posed by vendors and third parties too, because they're also part of your business ecosystem. Then we move on to the interconnectedness of risk. So we've mentioned, risks cannot be managed in silos. A really good example, I know we're all sick to death of hearing about COVID-19, but that came as a health and safety risk, but then it impacted other risks in the environment. So for example, IT risks, we had to prepare our staff for remote working, and for some organizations that was a big challenge because that wasn't the norm. But then it also led to increased hacker activity, and that in itself just goes to show one risk type may affect others. So it's really important that you have that visibility across the enterprise and it's centralized. The next one is the fast time to value with GRC and risk management programs. So I think a lot of people here, when we talk about risk management, talk about the dangers that we need to be aware of. But what sometimes gets overlooked is the fact that risk management can actually help you identify opportunities if it's done properly. So Michael, and again, something else that Michael mentioned that really stood out to me was he mentioned that many legacy GRC technologies can take years to set up. And by the time that they're ready, they're no longer suitable because the requirements have changed. So you don't want to have to start from scratch every time, something in your environment changes. You need something that's going to move with you, move with the times. And that's really where you're going to get your agility and resilience. And then the final piece here is just around the risk quantification and demonstrating value and ROI. This is really the bit that will allow you to communicate with the stakeholders. This is the bit that will allow you to prioritize risks and effectively manage resources. So again, this is something that's really, really important. It's not something that everyone's ready for, but for those organizations that do want to move away from the subjective assessment types, this can provide more clarity and accuracy. So on that note, I'm sure we're all dying to see how Stream can bring this all to life. So I'm going to hand over to Simon, and we're going to get into the demonstration.
Sam, thank you very much for that introduction and recap. Hello, everybody. Sam's already introduced me. Simon Marvel, I'm CEO and founder, one of the two founders of Acuity. Prior to starting Acuity, I was involved in a consulting business that provided enterprise risk management, information risk management, business continuity management to our clients. So I've been involved in this subject and related GRC and integrated risk management area for more time than I would like to remember. But for today's session, I'm going to draw out from the summary that Sorsan just provided you with the sort of the key themes that came out of that webinar series and that were fairly consistent through the 3 webinars that we did with Michael. First of all, we'll talk about holistic objectives-led approach to risk management. We'll look at the importance of 360-degree visibility and contextual awareness of risk. We'll look at the role of risk quantification and how it can help us to assess return on investment. We'll talk about the need for resilience, understanding dependencies, dealing with interconnectedness of risk, and then finally, not forgetting the compliance and controls part of GRC, we'll look at risk-based controls assurance and compliance. Before I jump over to Stream, I'd just like to highlight on this slide, we're showing the main use cases, the main applications of Stream. We're going to be focusing today mainly on those at the top: enterprise risk management, operational risk, cyber and IT risk. We'll touch on some of the others as well as we go through, but we won't be covering all of them, but we'd be happy, obviously, to provide separate demonstrations if you're interested in any of the other areas that we don't touch on today. One of the things I would point out is that Stream's a single integrated platform which we configure to address requirements. So we'll start off with an initial 1 or 2 use cases, and then our customers can expand out from that simply via additional configuration within Stream. So we don't provide separate modules that are sold separately. The benefit of that is that everything is seamlessly integrated. It's been designed to be completely integrated from the start. In order to do that, we needed to make Stream very configurable. And that means that there are quite a few different ways of configuring Stream to address different requirements and use cases. So I'm going to be showing you some example ways of configuring Stream today, but they're not the only ways. And of course, some people have different preferences when it comes to their GRC processes. And finally, before I jump over to the demonstration, there are 2 ways to interact with Stream. For the back office, which we sometimes refer to as the 2nd and 3rd lines of defense, which is, second line is the risk specialist, so the chief risk officer, for example, the CISO, the privacy manager, and their teams, and the 3rd line is internal audit. They tend to use Stream through the Stream user interface, which will be the bulk of today's demonstration will be through the Stream user interface. But the front office, so that's the rest of the business, the wider supply chain, the partner network, and so on, that have less regular requirement for interaction with a GRC solution, but when they do interact, they need it to be simple, intuitive, and fairly seamless. And for that, we use configurable and brandable web forms, and we'll provide a brief example of that also as we go through the demonstration. Okay, so with that, going to jump over to Stream. This is the Stream homepage, which opens up when we log into Stream. It's personal to the logged in user, and it's configurable also to the logged in user. And in fact, individual users can have multiple home pages if they wish to. So just as an example, if we have a look at perhaps a privacy management home page, then this is the sort of view that typically a privacy manager or privacy officer might wish to see. So information on records of processing activity, data subject access requests, DPIAs, breach and audit information, and so on. Now, that's not the subject of today's, or the prime subject of today's session, so I'll go back to the original home page. And this is showing us a summary of information that's of interest to the particular user. On the left-hand side, we can see a couple of charts relating to business objectives. And each of these provide a way of navigating, of course, to the underlying data. So we can see strategic, business unit, and functional objectives. Down at the bottom, we can see business objectives ranked by risk. So we can see those that have very high risk ratings as far as the objectives are concerned. Then we have charts on summary risk status, so the number of red, amber, and green or unassessed risks that the user has visibility of. Similar information on the status of controls that are mitigating risk or perhaps are required for compliance purposes. Down at the bottom right, we have similar information on open incidents, again collected together by severity of incident. We have an opportunity here that's been logged into Stream, and I can also see that as the logged in user, I have 4 actions that are overdue that are personal to me. Now I can navigate around Stream very easily from the home page, and in a moment we're going to start off and we're going to look at an objectives-based approach to risk management. Before I do that, I'm just going to jump over to the risk page, and I want to draw your attention to the left panel here, and we refer to this as an enterprise tree within Stream, and this is the way in which we can organize the way in which we wish to report, assess, and generally handle our risks, our controls, our incidents, our audits, and all of the various objects that we're going to manage within our system. It's completely configurable, it's unlimited, so it can grow to whatever size you would like it to be, and it's user managed as well, which means that the user only sees the part of the tree that they have explicit permission to access. So you can see here that we've set up a fictitious ABC corporation with some enterprise-wide risks at the top here, organizational risks. We then have 4 business units, each of which are structured down into lower layers of groupings. And then at the bottom, we have a couple of data centers as well. As I say, completely configurable, and we help you to set that up during the initial implementation. On the right-hand side here, then we can see summary information of our risk status across the enterprise tree, or the parts of the tree that we have visibility of. And at the top, we have 3 charts. We can see the number of red, amber, and green quantitative risks that we have within the system, ranked by their expected loss. We can see the number of red, amber, and green or unassessed qualitative risks that we have in the system, and we can see the average performance or deployment of the controls which are mitigating risk across the enterprise tree, and we'll look at that in some detail as we go through the presentation. Finally, down here then we can see similar summary information for each part of the tree, so the number of red, amber, and green risks at each part of the tree. We'll come back to this a little bit later on, but if I now go back to the home page, and we'll navigate over to look at some business objectives. And so here we have a list of, there's some example business objectives that we've entered for demonstration purposes. You can see that some of these are strategic, some apply at the business unit level, some at the functional level. This isn't limited to 3 categories of objective, it's completely configurable. We can see the owner, we can see the current category, whether it's a current objective, whether it's potentially retired, whether it's a pending objective, and we can also see some of these objectives have had risk ratings assigned to them. If we want to understand how these objectives apply across the enterprise, then we can see that at the ABC corporation level, so enterprise-wide, we have a number of strategic objectives, and I happen to know that down at business unit 2 we have a business unit objective, effective, efficient, quality customer interactions, or we have improved productivity and logistics management down at ABC logistics business unit level. Okay, so if I just go back to the complete list, And we'll navigate now into one of these objectives. I'll take the top one, which is improve cash balances. And so this opens up a page which on the left-hand side has information about the business objective, its name, where it sits in the enterprise tree, the category of objective, as we said before, whether it's strategic, business or functional. Down at the bottom, the target for the objective, 10% improvement over the previous year, a target date for achievement of the objective, 31st of December 2021. I'll come back to this in a minute. And over on the right-hand side, then we can see that we have two risks that have been linked to this particular business objective. And if I wish to link in another risk, I can simply do that. I can select from a catalogue of risks, and let's say that I want to add this one, data being inaccurate or out of date, and I can simply add that risk in and link it to the objective. So I can see summary information here. I can see the risks that relate to the objective. I can see the assessment status, and this is using a qualitative assessment scheme, which we'll look at in a minute. I can see that collusion between suppliers is amber and 10 and not accepted, and the other two risks are both green and accepted. Okay, if I want to, then I can also set an overall risk rating for the objective by taking account of these risks, and we can open them up to have a look at them, and I'm going to do that in a second. But on the basis of doing that, then I've scored this as a medium, this objective as a medium risk objective, and I've included a comment here that collusion on the Manchester project is an ongoing concern for this objective. So it's a way of risk ranking our business objectives. Okay, and we can build automation in to support this as well. So what I'll do now is just open up one of these risks, which is collusion between suppliers on the Manchester development project. You can see again, same sort of layout, information in the left column. We've got some other fields down here, risk category, which we can select from configurable catalog, risk owner, next assessment date and acceptance date, configurable fields such as cause and consequence, and each of these pages can have as many different additional configurable fields of different types as you would like to have. Over on the right hand side then, at the top we have our risk assessment scheme, which I'll come back to in a second. As we go down the page, we can see that this particular risk is actually linked to three business objectives. So improved cash balances that we were just on, improved accountability for product safety, improved productivity in logistics management. You can see here that we've linked an issue which relates to this particular risk. The procurement manager at Manchester has resigned. We'll come back to this, but we're starting to build up this 360-degree awareness of all of the various factors that contribute to our understanding of risk, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. As we go back to the top then, this is an example of a qualitative risk assessment scheme, and if I just open it up by clicking the assess button, you can see here that we have a very simple 5 by 5, very low to very high scale for business impact and likelihood. Even though we've assigned numbers 1 to 5 here, we refer to this as a qualitative scheme. They're just ordinal numbers, and this type of approach is very widely used. Lots of organizations, certainly those that are assessing risk using spreadsheets, tend to use this sort of qualitative approach or something very similar to it. And we'll look at other examples as we go through the presentation today. But we've assessed this particular risk as high impact, very high impact, medium likelihood. So a score of a 5 and a 3, which gives us an overall initial risk assessment of 15. Now, the residual risk assessment is made taking account of the controls that we have implemented to address the risk and the performance of those controls. And again, if you're using a spreadsheet type approach or a manual approach, then what tends to happen is that the risk analyst will go in and they will set a residual risk assessment themselves manually in much the same way that we set the initial risk assessment. The difficulty with doing that, of course, is that it's subject to individual bias, and it tends to be inconsistent in that different people, unless they are consistently trained risk analysts, may come to different conclusions about residual risk across different parts of the organization. So one way that we can try and build some consistency into that is to provide some automation around the estimation of residual risk. So here we can see the controls that have been mapped in to this particular risk, and they've come from a catalogue. And over here we can see the relative importance of each of these controls at mitigating risk, and we can also see the health of the controls in terms of how well they're deployed. So our current assessment at the moment is that we have a residual risk of amber and 10, which is derived from an impact of very high and a likelihood of low. But if we open up one of these controls, let's take the second one, then we can see that we have a control here. It's some pre-established objective selection criteria for the project. We can see a description of the project. Again, we're using configurable fields here to link to business processes or to various regulations. And then over on the right-hand side, we can see at the top a control assessment scheme, and we've looked very simply at whether the control is implemented and whether it's effective. And I can open up an assessment for this control, and I'm seeing here that yes, I've said that this control is implemented, the other options being partially implemented or not implemented, and I've said that currently it's partially effective, and I could record comments for that if I wish to. And on the basis of that, we've assessed the residual risk as amber and 10. Perhaps we might come back a little bit later. We've raised and completed an action to address this particular control and make sure that it's implemented effectively. And if I update the assessment later on to say that it's effective and okay it, then first of all, we set the deployment for the control to 100%, but also the residual risk is re-estimated now at 9 points. So the risk has come down, the residual risk has been reduced very slightly from 10 down to 9, and that's because we've taken action to improve the performance of one of these controls. So this is a way of getting some additional consistency and having some assurance that you're taking a consistent approach across the enterprise. Another way to ensure some consistency and to provide some automated support to both identification of risk and of mitigating controls is if we look at adding another risk into Stream and open up the template to do that. I can either select from a catalogue of controls, and why don't I do that, select collusion between suppliers again, just for demonstration purposes. So this is a list of procurement related risks that are within the catalogue that's held within Stream, and I might say that I'm now concerned about collusion between suppliers on Bristol vehicles project. Something like that. I can optionally link this risk to an asset if I wish to, the vehicles project. I won't complete this other information down here, but if I click apply, then Stream will automatically prompt me with a list of controls that have been drawn from the relevant catalogue for procurement controls that are considered appropriate to help mitigate the risk of collusion between suppliers. Okay, so within the framework, we maintain various catalogs, keep those up to date. We can also very easily import your own catalogs if you have them, but it's a way of helping us to, and I can select some, all, or none of these if I wish to, but if I select them all, then these are added in and linked to the risk. So this is quite a neat way of providing some assurance and giving some assistance when we're identifying risks. And of course, I can then link those risks to this new risk, to objectives. I can assess my controls, I can assess the risk, and so on. One way to assess the controls will be through the user interface, as we've seen, but quite often it might be the situation where we want to pass responsibility out for assessing the controls to somebody in the business. And this is the point at which we might then use a web form. So this is an example of a control assessment web form in Stream, set up exactly for the controls that we've just been looking at on the Bristol Vehicles project. We've got the controls there, the 6 controls, I think it is, no, the 5 controls that we were looking at, and an option here to assess implementation and effectiveness, to record comments, to link evidence, and so on. This is completely configurable, it's brandable, very, very flexible. There's a couple of other examples on the next page. Again, we won't go into these in any detail, but forms for supplier assurance, forms for incident logging, and those various use cases that I showed you at the start on the wheel, on the Stream wheel. Most of those, or many of those, have the capability, or you would tend to want to use web forms for gathering certain information. And it's a two-way thing as well. So the web form can be sent out as a link to the business or to vendors within the supply chain. It's a two-way interaction. We can go backwards and forwards asking for clarification, further information. And certain forms can be lodged on a portal as well, an intranet site, for example. So in particular, the incident logging form might be lodged on a portal somewhere to be opened up and completed where an incident is identified. Okay, so just to jump back over to Stream. So that's gone through the objectives-based risk management. We'll talk about it a little bit more as we go through the demonstration today. But what I'd like to do now is to go on to look at a little bit further at broad visibility of risk and also bring in risk quantification. So I'm going to go over to the risk dashboarding. I can now see the two risks which are on my procurement risk register. I'm going to go over to my Program A register now, and here I have 4 risks which are related to data leakage, applying to different channels. Well, 2 of them relate to leakage via staff emails for UK customer trials data and product design data, and then we have leakage via cloud services and hard copy print as well. So this risk register has been set up as a quantitative risk register, and we can see summary information in terms of the most likely financial loss that we would expect to see within the next 12 months from each of these risks, and we'll look at these in a second. The number of controls that are mitigating the risk at the moment, each of these risks, the average performance of those controls in terms of control deployment, and the acceptance status of the controls. And if I, as an example, open up the first one, then again you can see a very similar page layout, the risk name, the threat, the asset, where it sits in the enterprise tree, the risk category, and so on. But over on the right-hand side, then at the top, instead of the qualitative, initial, and residual risk assessment widgets, we can see that we've got a quantitative risk assessment scheme, which we'll come back to. As we go down the right side, then you can see that we're linked to a couple of business objectives. We've also logged some incidents here as well that relate to the risk. So we've got email disclosure of financial data, data breach via email, staff inadvertently sharing sensitive information by email. So we've collected relevant incident data. That's going to help us with our quantitative risk assessment. And this is another example of starting to gather more contextual information about the risk. And I can also link in whatever other object types, entity types we tend to refer them to them as within Stream, such as near miss, audit findings, issues, test results, crises, opportunities, and so on. And so we can link these in as well to the risk to provide this sort of greater contextual understanding of the risk itself. Okay, coming back up then to the risk assessment. You can see that we've identified the controls which are mitigating the risk. We understand the health of those controls, and on the basis of that, and on the basis of our incident experience, and perhaps with the help of maybe subject matter expert, then we've recorded a quantitative risk assessment. And here we've looked at, instead of initial and residual, very low to very high scales, we're looking at a range of financial loss with a confidence interval. So here we're saying that if we suffer data leakage via staff email involving UK customer trials data, then we think that we could lose, in 90% of cases, between $1 and $5 million. In 5% of cases, it could be less than $1 million, and in 5% of cases, it could be more than $5 million, sorry, dollars. And in a very small number of cases, it could be much higher than 5 million. Okay, so there's a range, there's a distribution of potential losses. Similarly, we look at the typical experience of frequency of incidents. And if we've been having on average incidents once every 2 years, then we might say that on average every year we think there might be 0.5 incidents. Again, it's just an estimate. There could be fewer, there could be more in any 1 year, but we're saying that on average we think this is the frequency. If we do that, and we're only using 4 data points here instead of the 2 that we use for qualitative risk assessment, then we can apply some statistical analysis and we can work out the most likely financial loss in the next 12 months. Now, again, it's only an estimate. There's uncertainty associated with it. It could be less than that. It could be higher. But the peak of the distribution comes at $1.26 million. If anybody's interested in the maths behind this, be happy to talk about that on a separate call. If we go back to the dashboard, this gets really interesting when we start to aggregate risk data, which is something that's very difficult to do with qualitative risk assessment. So here we can see we've got our 4 data leakage risks. We've done a similar assessment for each of them, and you can see the results over here. If we look at the aggregation of that data on a report which is called a loss exceedance chart, then we see this sort of report. And this is showing us, based on our quantitative risk assessment, the probability of losing more than certain financial amounts in the next 12 months. So here we're saying that there's approximately 70% chance at the moment that we could lose more than $1 million in the next 12 months. Okay, so this overall is our risk profile. The dotted line is showing us the management's tolerance for risk. So it's telling us, for example, that management have said that they're only prepared to accept a 25% chance of losing more than $1 million from data leakage risks in the next 12 months. And again, you can see the risk tolerance. So what this immediately is telling us, and it's a very nice graphical sort of illustration of the difference between our current risk profile and our tolerance for risk, which means that we need to do something about this risk to bring it down within tolerance. One of the nice features of Stream is that you can model the effect of adding new controls or improving the performance of the controls that you already have. We can do that through the control improvement projection. This is the same chart, it's just been squashed into half the page. But as an example, I can go and look at a prospective control that I've been considering, which is enterprise data loss prevention. Somebody suggested that we might deploy that because it can be used to help protect against data leakage via multiple channels. And with Stream, then we can simulate what the risk distribution would look like if we implemented enterprise DLP. And what we can see here now is that the risk profile has reduced and it's gone below management's tolerance for risk. And in fact, the chance of losing more than $1 million in the next 12 months has reduced from 70% to around about 10%. So we're now within management's tolerance for risk. So this is very useful if you're wanting to assess the ROI from implementing a solution like enterprise DLP. There's some data there on which you can work on. Of course, there is still a lot of uncertainty about it, and that's the nature of risk, in that there's still a 10% chance that we could lose more than $1 million. But you can have a fairly mature conversation, I think, with budget holders about uncertainty and risk, and use that to help you determine whether this would be a good investment for the business. The green line, incidentally, is the level of the risk profile we'll get down to if all of those controls that were mitigating risk were fully and effectively deployed. And of course, when we looked at it, they weren't. Okay, so that's just a quick run through of the sort of quantitative approach within Stream. I'd like to talk now about resilience, dependencies, and interconnectedness of risk. We're still in the pandemic. The pandemic was on government risk registers. I understand it was at or near the top of the UK government's risk register, but most countries were unprepared for the pandemic. Not all of them, but most were. And equally, most organisations were unprepared. However, some were more resilient than others, and those that were digital and secure or could transition quickly to being digital and secure tended to do rather better. So going forward, businesses will need to look at how they could be more resilient to pandemics and other potential existential risks. And it's one thing to do that for risks that we know about, and hopefully we might be better prepared for the next pandemic, but not all risks are known, and events could occur that we've never even thought about. But we can still work on resilience if we know what's critical to achieving business objectives, and we know what those critical things are dependent on. Then we can work out the potential scenarios that could cause material or even existential disruption from events that could occur that we've never even thought about. So if we know what's critical and we work out what we depend upon, then we tend to find that we may find that we've got single points of failure or correlations which could cause a disproportionate impact if they were to occur. And typical examples in business could be critical suppliers, which we're very dependent upon, critical supply routes. The Suez Canal was a good example recently. Territories where governance, legal, regulatory regimes might change, perhaps China, I don't know, and critical processes as well within the business, perhaps manufacturing processes on which multiple products depend. So I just want to show you a sort of quick, fairly simple example of how we address this within Stream. So if we go to look at our very high risk objective at the moment, that's reducing product time to market. And here you can see, again, same layout information on the left side. We can see that we're already linked to two risks. Pandemic disrupts the supply chain, that's a high risk. Pandemic, in a rush to move staff to work from home, we have security vulnerabilities, could result in disclosure of customer data and disrupt our supply to market. We've also linked the objective to a couple of products and a manufacturing process. So this is all about reducing product time to market, in particular these two products which are dependent upon the manufacturing process. So if we open up product Y, then here we've got information about the product. Over on the right side, we can see that we're dependent upon the manufacturing process. We've still got these two risks that relate to product Y. You can see the business objective and so on. At the top here, I've got an assessment score. And if I just open that, I can see here that I've been able to make an assessment of the product. Again, it's very simple, 5-point assessment. If you want to use something more sophisticated with multiple criteria, then we can do that. And we've assessed here that this is the highest earning product in our portfolio. Disruptions to supply would have a severe impact on our earnings. Okay, so if I just go back out of that, let's go and have a look at the manufacturing process. We can see here the manufacturing process is supporting not just product Y, but product Z as well. So it's supporting a couple of products. I can also see that there's another risk here that we've identified, which is cyber attack on the manufacturing process. So if I open up that particular risk, then I'm back to a qualitative risk assessment now. Again, I can see here, this is a cyber attack, halts manufacturing. It could be from a hacker group or nation state. Potential for extended disruption to manufacturing, all of which is going to impact on our business objective. And if I look at the risk assessment that's been made for cyber attack on the manufacturing process, I can see the dependencies of the manufacturing process. So I can see when I'm considering how risky this might be to the business and to achieving my objectives, I can see information about the two products. I can see that this one is highly valuable, has potentially high impact. Again, I can take account of that in my risk assessment. And this, of course, can all be automated as well. I haven't done that just to keep it simple for the purposes of the demonstration. If I want to see where my risks are in relation to others, I can look at the risk heat map. I happen to know that this one over here is cyber attack on the manufacturing process, so it's a red risk. It was a 5 and a 3 on our qualitative scheme, but I can also see the other red risks that we have here at different points on the grid, and my amber and my green risks as well. If I want to see my initial risks and where they came from and how the risks have moved, I can see all of that as well. Okay, if I want to look at top 10 risks across the enterprise, I can do that. Here I've got cyber attack on the manufacturing process is pretty high. I think that's probably number 6 on the risk, behind pandemic over here and some other risks. Okay, so the point really that I just tried to illustrate in a fairly simple way is that business is complex. It has interdependencies, but if we can understand what our critical or what our most important business objectives are, and in this particular case it was reduce product time to market, which products relate to that objective, what are those products dependent on the manufacturing process, what are the risks to the manufacturing process with cyber attack, and therefore what preventative or resilience measures am I going to apply to the risk of cyber attack to the manufacturing process, which will improve the resilience of my business overall and help me to achieve business objectives. Exactly the same approach would apply to critical suppliers, to key partners, and so on. And where you have a complex business, supply chains, lots of interrelationships, you need an appropriate data model, and you need software to help you to identify these potential high-risk areas. And also, if you understand these various interrelationships, then you can easily model the effect of change. So it's easy to add in another product to the manufacturing process and model that, to add in new or changed objectives and link them, to add in new risks, or to change things when perhaps the level of risk increases. As we saw earlier, we can't anticipate all of the risks, some of them are unknown, but if we know what's critical to achieving objectives and the dependencies, then at least we can do some scenario analysis around that. We can make ourselves resilient and we'll be better prepared to react quickly when an unexpected event arises. Finally, also under interconnectedness of risk, some boards like to see high-level enterprise risk registers, which sort of form an aggregate view of risk across different business units and regions. So another way of doing this would be to perhaps look at an enterprise-wide risk register, and here we have leakage of sensitive data. And over here we can see that we've got a number of related risks, some of which we were looking at. These were down in program A. We've got data breach here on the payment processing cloud, which is in another part of the business. We've assessed these all quantitatively, and we saw how we could aggregate the data quantitatively. Boards sometimes just like to see a heat map. They like to see their top risks as they relate across the business. So this is a way of doing that. It's to log the initial and residual risk assessment, and here we've got a 4 and a 3, which gives a 12 overall for leakage of sensitive data. Do need to be a little bit careful with aggregating risk, particularly qualitatively, but also where you have risks that aren't either related to a single point of failure or some key dependency, or aren't otherwise correlated in some way. So I think it works in this case for data leakage potentially. It certainly worked for reliance on of products on the manufacturing, a single manufacturing process. I sometimes see risk registers where the risk of fire has been assessed at multiple independent sites, and they've been aggregated up to give a high risk of fire at the enterprise level. And I have some sort of doubts about that sort of aggregation, because those individual risks aren't related, they're not correlated. They just happen to be called by the same name. So I think that a little bit of caution is needed there. Finally, part 5 of the demonstration was just to quickly not forget about controls and compliance. And if I just go across to the control status page, then you see in the left column here at the top, the enterprise tree, at the bottom, various control catalogs and regulations such as GDPR, standards such as ISO 27001. This is showing all of the controls within our controls catalog. You can see the assessment status, deployment status of those controls, various other information relating to when they were last updated or assessed. If I want to filter by, I don't know, IoT controls, for example, I can do that. I can filter by various parts of the enterprise tree if I wish to. If I want to look at a standard such as ISO 27001, this is the status of my level of compliance with ISO 27001. I'm assessing it once for the entire organization, which may not perhaps be the way in which you would always do it. If I wanted to look at a particular part of ISO 27001, such as cryptography, I could do that. This is a policy requirement on the use of cryptographic controls. So again, I can see the control here. I can see that I've used a different way of assessing the control. So I'm looking at responsibility, evidence, documentation, and status of the control across the ISMS. We refer to this as REDS. It's popular with our customers that use Stream for ISO 27001 management system, or quality management, or enterprise management systems, and so on. And again, there are various sort of options against each of these criteria. But on the basis of our just point out that what we've actually said here is that ABC policy is that BitLocker should be implemented on all corporate laptops. Policy has been implemented, communicated globally, and embedded in local operating procedures. And on the basis of that assessment, then we've got a green 88% deployment score. What this shows us, though, however, is that things might be a little bit different on the ground. So we're using some key control indicators here to look at the proportion of portable devices which are actually protected by company approved encryption. And if I just open up the first of those, UK laptops, and look at the assessment that's been made there, we're saying that the rollout of these laptops is 80% complete. Delays are due to COVID restrictions. Okay, so it's 80% deployed within the UK, but we can also see that in Spain it hasn't started. In France, there's some way to go. In Italy, there's a way to go, and so on. So on the basis of that, we can, if we wish to, adjust automatically the assessment that we've given to the compliance control. And here we're saying that it's rather than 88%, as we might think it is at the centre, based on what's happening on the ground, it's 63%. So we can see that all summarised on a control status report. So this is the assessment against ISO 27001, and here you can see what we've just been looking at, and that is all then rolled up into an overall summary report of our level of compliance against ISO 27001. Final report I'll show you is what we call a control improvement priority report, and this actually allows us, because we link the controls to the risks, then we can pivot round to the controls, and we can say, if we implement this new control, such as enterprise DLP, or if we improve other controls which are currently weak, then how much risk improvement are we going to get? And we can use that to prioritize our control improvements. And unsurprisingly, you tend to find the controls that are protecting against multiple risks tend to be those that come higher up the list, and also those that are less well deployed or not deployed at all. Okay. With that, I think I should stop the presentation. I'm slightly conscious that I've gone on a little bit longer than perhaps I intended to. So I'm just going to jump back over to the presentation. Just move down, just very quickly, some key takeaways. I would suggest considering top-down approach, objectives-led approach to help us to prioritize, focus down on risks of concern. If we can get this visibility, if we can bring the various data together, it might be in different spreadsheets or in different systems, bring it in via API, upload it into the system from legacy data, and so on, then the more visibility you have, the easier it is to understand risk. Think about quantifying risk. A lot of our customers start with qualitative approach. That's what they're used to. Try out risk quantification, different areas, particularly where we have a bit of data, and also where return on investment type assessment is important. I think understanding dependencies of objectives, risks to dependent assets is important, and thinking about building resilience to the business for the future. And then finally, the risk-based controls assurance. Being compliant isn't secure when it comes to security, and the same is true, I'm sure, for other regulations and standards. But if we can take a risk-based approach to that, then we can be both compliant and secure. I think at that point, I'll hand back to Sorsan.
Thank you so much, Simon. You really brought to life what we had mentioned at the start of the webinar. I can see already it's prompted a lot of questions. If you've not got your question in already, please do put them in the chat. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can, run over a few minutes if we need to, and those that we don't get onto, we can get back to you via email if that's okay. But yes, a lot of questions have come through. So I'll quickly whiz through some of these end slides so that we can get to those questions. If you were interested in today's session, in the handout section, you can download the stream brochure, and you can also download the independent review that Michael wrote and we published today. Again, as I mentioned, this is based on his own evaluation of the product and also conversations with customers. So we highly recommend that you download that. for those of you that are familiar with us and have seen the website recently, you'll know that we've recently published a new website. All the resources around all the different applications for Stream can be found here. If you've not visited the website before, would really highly encourage you to do so. And for our customers as well, you can now access the customer portal quite easily, either through the website or by contacting your account manager if you don't have credentials. But that's a really good space for customers. We've received fantastic feedback about it. These are some of the applications that are most commonly addressed by Stream, and these are the ones that come up quite often. In our previous series, we have covered some of these elements. So, we've covered enterprise risk management, operational risk management, privacy, vulnerability. But if there are any areas you are interested in, please don't hesitate to contact us for a bespoke demonstration. And there are data sheets available on all these applications on our website as well. Those of you that have followed the series from the beginning, hopefully you've enjoyed it. We had a lot of feedback about this series, and there were a few topics that kept coming up that people wanted to know more about. So we've put together another series with Michael Rasmussen, The Future of GRC Continued, and they're going to focus really on a practical approach, which is something that came up in our feedback. So we do take your ideas on board. There's going to be 3 sessions, one around managing risk in the extended enterprise, so really talking about vendor and supply chain risks there, more examples of web forms, an extension from today. The next one is around the corporate integrity and providing defensibility, compliance and ethics. I know that's something we did run through quite quickly today, but we'll go through it in more detail on that session there. So if you're interested in compliance and ethics, that will be a really good one. And then finally, last but not least, developing an integrated approach to privacy and security in the modern enterprise. Details and dates of these will be announced soon, so please do keep your eyes peeled for those. Let's get through to some of these questions here. So the first one here I can see, Simon, how do you measure and evaluate risks?
Thanks, Sorsan. Well, there are two approaches, I think, a qualitative or a quantitative approach, and I've sort of demonstrated both of those through today's session. As I said, lots of organizations take a qualitative approach at the moment. I think that's fine for general triage, for prioritization of risks. There's been a lot of chat about it in the industry recently. It is difficult to aggregate qualitative risks. How many ambers make a red risk, for example, and if you've got multiple red risks, which of those is the highest red risk, as it were. So there are some difficulties around that. The other approach is the quantitative approach, which is looking at financial assessment, as we saw, using some statistical analysis. The distribution that we showed was based on Monte Carlo analysis, so it's sampling statistically, but it's giving a more statistically correct aggregation of risk, and it's reflecting the fact that there is uncertainty in risk as well. So if you looked at that chart and you took the decision that it would be a good investment to buy enterprise DLP and implemented it, you still need to be aware that there's a 10% chance that data leakage could still materialize. But I think it's moving us towards a more mature conversation, and I think there's nothing wrong with qualitative. If that's what we've got at the moment, we can certainly support qualitative assessments and perhaps consider quantitative in particular parts of the business or where there's a specific need for it.
Fantastic. The next question here, do the control libraries come pre-populated or does that user buy as needed?
No, the libraries that are required to meet the use case or to meet the requirement are provided as part of the package. Now, we have a very large library of controls, control frameworks, control standards. We also have a large library of threat catalogs, and we have mappings between the threats and the controls as I demonstrated as we went through the session. Not all of them are applicable to everybody. Some are related to particular sectors and so on. So we agree, as part of the scoping exercise, the control packages that are appropriate. If you have some of your own, or if you have, or you need to use some that we don't have, it's very simple and straightforward for us to upload those catalogs for you and to link them as well.
Fantastic. There's still quite a few questions to get through, but I'll ask one more. This is by one of our customers, actually. Can you tell us about your roadmap?
Yes. So we just recently released the web forms capability. That was at the end of 2020, and we talked about that today. We're just working at the moment on a number of customer-specific requests, so around user management, around audit history. But we'll be going on very shortly to do some work on refreshing the user interface, looking at the user experience to make sure that that's as seamless as it could be. We're also integrating business intelligence. So we have documented data views within Stream for all of the objects within Stream, which means that we can integrate via API with business intelligence solutions for additional customized reporting. That's going to be brought into Stream, so that BI reporting will be accessible in reports via the Stream UI, alongside some of those examples that we've been looking at today. We're also looking at bringing reports onto the home page. So the home page that I showed you with the various charts and so on, the various reports, including the BI reports, which will be embedded within Stream, will be visible, viewable via the home page as well. That will be configurable. And then also the home page is going to be selectable by enterprise tree as well. So a lot, most of the focus for the next period is going to be around refreshing the UI, enhancing some of the reporting with business intelligence, and bringing that to life through the dashboarding as well.
Fantastic. For those questions that haven't been answered, we are really sorry. We have gone over quite a bit. We'll cut this webinar here. However, as I said, if you do have any questions, or if you've asked them already and they've not been answered, we will get back to you via email or arrange a call if you would prefer. And on that note, thank you so much, Simon, as well, for your participation, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you, everyone.